Podcast Bites.
If our breathing rate is optimal, or we use exercises like the yogic exercise 4-6-8 breathing, where you take a nice deep belly breath for 4 seconds, hold that breath for 6 seconds, and then slowly breathe out through the mouth or nose. You always want to breathe in through the nose. You can breathe out through the mouth or nose and breathe out for 8 seconds. If you do that for even 3 minutes, you'll shift from a sympathetic state to a parasympathetic state, and the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic system has a calming effect on the body. Now, there's much more, but I don't want to make this too technical. It's very important to inhale through our nose. Our nose has turbinates in it. If you look at an anatomy book, you can see these veins. It looks like the bones kind of curl, and those turbinates are lined with hair and mucus, and the hairs are tickled by the movement of air, and that stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system and helps balance our autonomic nervous system. We have a lot of immune antibodies in our mucous membrane, secretory immunoglobulin A, secretory IgA it's called. And that's our first line of defense from things coming in on air, such as bacteria, viruses, and fungal spores that can get in our body, or even parasites. So if we're not breathing through our nose effectively, and we're breathing through our mouth, the instant we start breathing through our mouth, we go into a sympathetic dominant situation, because in nature we're designed to breathe through our nose for these reasons. And if we have to breathe through our mouth, it either means we're working really hard or we're running or fighting for our life. And so when people are eating foods that they're having immune reactions to, and it produces too much phlegm, it clogs their nasal airways up, and they end up breathing through their mouth all the time. That winds up the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight system, which causes the body to produce adrenaline and cortisol, which then eventually burns your adrenal glands out, and you end up getting more and more chronically fatigued until you end up with what will be a label called chronic fatigue syndrome, and that's tied with a lot of other syndromes. So we have to be conscious of these things. Now, a simple technique to learn to breathe properly is to just sit or stand with good posture, put one hand over your belly button and the other hand on your chest, and simply remember the 2/3, 1/3 rule. As you inhale through your nose, your belly should expand for the first 2/3 of the breath, and the chest should only begin to expand in the last 1/3 of the breath. Very few people breathe that way unless they're focusing on it, and if they don't practice, they forget. And if you're eating too much processed, refined sugars, no matter how hard you try, you'll never be able to fix that, because your ventilation rate will go up, which will trigger a fight or flight response, which makes your brain think that you're running or fighting for your life, and then eventually you'll develop what I call a fear pattern, which is chest breathing and often tight abdominals, which cuts your average breath volume down by at least 1/3. And that was identified a long time ago. Joel E. Goldthwait, in the book Body Mechanics in Health and Disease, published in 1934, showed analysis of diaphragmatic movement and showed that the average person is only getting about 2/3 of normal air volume, which leads to all sorts of problems that we've discussed. Now, a technique I developed to help people reprogram themselves to breathe effectively that you can easily apply, one of my gifts for listening to the podcast, is simply get a piece of kite string, tie it around your belly button so it's just against the skin. It doesn't have to be tight. And every hour on the hour, set a clock or a watch or a phone to beep on the hour. As you breathe in, expand your belly into the string so you can feel the string getting tight. That gives you a feedback mechanism to let you know you're expanding your belly. And then again, only in the last third of the breath, breathe with your chest. And while you're doing those, what I call centering breaths with your string, imagine that as you inhale, you're like a tree growing up toward the sun. and you're evolving, you're growing. And as you exhale, imagine that out of your feet, you're growing roots down into the earth that help stabilize you. And that way you can withstand the storms, the heavy winds of emotion or physical challenges or surprises that you didn't expect, like losing a job, a death in the family, or, finding, the challenges of being a parent in that first year or two and lacking a lot of sleep. Breathing is the catalyst in most all spiritual development practices, from meditation to mindfulness to managing one's mind and emotions. So, isn't it interesting that almost all spiritual development systems begin with focusing awareness on breath? Why? Because as I said earlier, without breathing, the soul cannot anchor itself in the body. And the soul is the consciousness within you. So in order to evolve, you must be conscious or you cannot learn. Consciousness is essentially one aspect of consciousness is the total information carrying capacity of any system, living or otherwise. So if you don't breathe well, then your biological systems shut down and you go into a fight or flight state, and you cannot expand your knowledge base effectively because it's very, very hard to learn when the body's in a fight or flight state. It's thinking you got to run from a lion. That's not a good time to take out an anatomy book or a book on how to pass your driver's test, because your brain has no interest in those kinds of things. It thinks it's running or fighting for its life.
Avocado, motherfucker.